All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening, and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa, and they're here already.
They're here already.
And you're next. We're here today to talk about yet another. I'm glad that we're making this a monthly thing.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can keep this going, but we're here to talk about another bona fide Hollywood classic, Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956. I'm so excited about this.
Dude, I was completely unaware of the fact that this 1956 version existed. I thought that the 1978 was the original. Like when we started talking about doing this, you were like, okay, should we do the original or what are the remakes? And like, I was thinking of later ones and I was like, which one's like 78? You're like, no, there's one before that. I was like, oh, holy shit. I had no idea. I thought that 70s version was a 78 with Donald Sutherland and all them, like that, and was
Leonard Nimoy, Jeff Goldblum. I mean, it is like stacked.
Oh yeah, I thought that was the original, so I was excited to get into this. We also looked at the fact that doing this not only as a classic, but this thing has been remade and made so many times, and they're when we were researching, we found out they're getting ready to do another one.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But I guess when you have a story that kind of hits on such a primal level, it's really easy to keep remaking it, because as long as you hit upon the larger theme at work here, there's always going to be people to reach.
Right.
And you could always make it fresh in the same way that it was made fresh in the 70s and again in the 90s and again in the late 2000s. I'm okay with these remakes. The only one I think really lives up to the original is the 1978 remake. But there's something about that 90s one, green screen aside, there's something about that 90s one. Can't say I'm a huge fan about that 2007 one, The Invasion.
Yeah, didn't like that one that much. The ABC show in like the early 2000s tried. I mean, they tried. It seemed like they had big dreams of it being something, and it just didn't seem to play out well. One of my favorite remakes of this is one of the ones that's not even a straight up remake, and that's At World's End. I mean, is essentially is essentially an homage to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? But they knocked that one out of the park.
Yeah, man. Anything that those guys touch is just gold.
Yeah,
it's funny, and it's also a really good homage to the genre that it's satirizing as well, because Shaun of the Dead is a fantastic zombie movie on top of being really funny.
Right.
And Hot Fuzz is a really great police thriller.
Yes, it is. Yeah, those that's Nick Frost and Simon Pegg. Like they get it, man. Like they understand like how homage and satire work. But yeah, so like I said, just when we're looking at the remakes of that, At World's End, I think was a great send up to this movie.
Absolutely. So one of the other things that we get with Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and it's not the one that kind of sparks this, but it is definitely one of the movies that I think cements this, which is the shift in horror from the gothic to the science fiction. And this is something that you see even in Universal Monsters, which were, clearly very gothic horror. There's this shift to sci-fi in the 1950s. You see it in The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Right.
It's a little bit more sci-fi, a little bit less gothic. We also see it with things like The Incredible Shrinking Man and Tarantula. The movies where science is somehow at fault here for what's going on. So one of the things that happens is, I think, when a movie falls in line with what's going on in that decade, it can feel dated sometimes. So does this movie, kind of similar to the question that I asked with Bride of Frankenstein, does it still scare today? Like, is it still something that you would call horror today? And is it still effective? I mean, we're talking about almost 70 years later. Is it still an effective horror movie?
So, like I said, this was my first time seeing this original one, and it's you always, you gotta remember the time and place when you go to watch it. But as far as it still being scary, there are some genuinely horrifying moments in this movie, a lot of which stem from this idea of just a whole town being against you, which is a scary thought. It's amazing that you kind of go back, and this movie is pretty special effects light. I mean, they really, there's not, they light a pot, they light a couple of the pods on fire with a road flare at one time. That's really like elaborate as special effects get. But they did a good job of creating this really super tense atmosphere that they set from the jump, because we're immediately introduced to the doctor and he's freaking out. And the whole thing is his recollection of what happened. So you're immediately in the shit, because even as he's flashing back, you're going to get to the point where you end up, where he's in this police station in another town,
and raving.
Just completely lost his mind. And one of the things that it does that's so scary is it introduces him like that, and then it shows you what he was before he became the raving lunatic. And it's like, whatever's about to happen is like serious shit, because this dude is not who opened this movie. And so I think
he looks like a legitimate doctor. He doesn't look like a crazy person.
Exactly. So I think they did a lot to create this really great atmosphere of never really fully understanding what was going on, being scared. You immediately are confronted with these people who aren't acting the right way, the little boy running away from his mom, the girl who's not interacting with her uncle. And there's something, it's really easy to tell why this has become fodder for remakes, because there's something innately scary about that. I mean, just 2 weeks ago when we did the Hallow, we talked about changelings. That's a terrifying idea, that something could look and behave like your family member, but not be them. And you can't quite put your finger on it. That's scary. No special effects, no actual like alien ships needed. Yeah, I think that still hits as scary. This had some good, intense moments. I think that the message really rings clear on the fact that this could, that this is a terrifying situation. And I think that this still goes all out.
I agree, and I think a lot of that, the atmosphere that you mentioned, has to do with the fact that Don Siegel, who is, I think, a criminally underrated director.
Oh, dude made Dirty Harry and Escape from Alcatraz. Like,
come on. this guy's like a fucking badass. He made a couple movies with Clint Eastwood, and they were all fucking amazing. So he creates an atmosphere here using classic film noir style techniques. It's a lot of light play, dark and light, and the casting of shadows. There's high contrast going on here, and the really interesting thing is how he's able to make this all seem like a dream. And
Yeah.
and it has few movies have such an authentic dreamlike quality to them as this does. There's a couple of others that come to mind, but what really interests me is that this was never intended to be a flashback movie. The sequence at the beginning and the sequence at the end were filmed after the movie was shot, edited, and screened for audiences.
Interesting.
Yeah, the studio Allied Artists did not like the rather pessimistic ending. It ended with him on the bridge shouting, "They're here already, you're next, you're next." And that's where it ends.
Right, as opposed to the hugely optimistic ending we got of him standing there shaking his head.
Don Siegel didn't want that ending. The producer of the movie, I forget his name, he didn't want that ending, but the studio insisted upon it. And yet, even though the movie was not intended to be told in flashback, it still has that rather dreamlike quality that flashback movies tend to have sometimes. You know, you look back on events and they're not quite exactly the way that they seem. Which is why there's a couple inconsistencies there where even though he's telling the story, we can see that like for example, like what's going on like behind closed doors where he clearly couldn't see
where he
something
wouldn't
happening.
be able to tell what happened, right?
And that's why, because it was never intended to be a POV flashback thing.
Okay.
So so that's like one really interesting quality that I think this movie has, which continues to be really effective, is it's kind of like a nightmare. And it feels like a nightmare as it's playing out. And the fact that they can't go to sleep makes this even more of a nightmare, right? It's very similar to A Nightmare on Elm Street. You know, that's another movie that has a really dreamlike quality, whether what we're seeing is in the dream world or in the real world. And a lot of that has to do with that meta crossing over that that we know Wes Craven loves so much. Right. So I do think it's really effective because of that, because dreams still plague us. And our dreams oftentimes are timeless. We don't have our dreams set in any one particular time. A knight in shining armor can just as quickly walk into our dream and say some random shit like, "Did you put the laundry in?" and walk away as a UFO comes in and out comes fucking Astro from the Jetsons. Right. And our dreams have that ability to kind of transcend time. And this movie does do that. It feels timeless. Like, it very clearly looks like it's set in the 50s, but it could very well be today.
Yeah, and that is a thing. You're absolutely right. Like, this movie never felt dated, right? Like, visually, you're right. Obviously, this is the 50s, but the rest of it didn't feel old. Like, it didn't feel like it was 70, you know? Like, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. And the fear of losing your humanity is I think a very primal thing. It's something that we're all afraid of,
right?
You know, getting whether it's getting caught up in our own lives and forgetting to actually live, or whether it's getting swept up in the moment of whatever that moment might be. You know, that sort of mob mentality thinking, right? Or whether it's falling prey to a movement. There's a lot here that is still relevant today. McCarthyism may be an icon of the 50s,
right?
But McCarthyism exists in different ways today.
Well, and there was a line that I wrote down. Like, he specifically addresses it. You know, he says, "I've watched many people as their humanity slips away. It just usually happens slowly. It's not until we have to fight for it. It's not until we have to fight for it that we understand that we were ever losing it." And so one of the other things that's so amazing about this movie is there's this really existential idea of it, kind of in two parts. One being this idea of, like, well, I mean, is a life with no joy, worth
Mhm.
living if it means no pain, no sorrow, that whole thing, right? So, and that's a weird thing to ever sit down and try to contemplate, because it's easy when you're in a position where things are, kind of going your way, to be like, oh no, that's ridiculous. But it's also real easy to think that, we've all been in a place where if somebody were to be like, yeah, look, you know how everything sucks? What if like nothing sucked again, right? And all you've got to do is go to sleep and you're not going to die, right? Because then it introduces this other concept of, is that still you, right? That's the thing that has been like plaguing me, right? It's this whole idea of like almost like transhumanism,
Mhm.
without the technology. If you can
Yeah.
create something that's 99.9% you, it has all of your memories. It's a different body, but it's still your body. Like it's missing that one piece, like that one ability to emote. Is that what we kind of boil this idea of like the human soul down to, right? And so,
Mhm.
while none of these things are just like what's great about this is none of these things are just like outwardly addressed in the movie, but it's impossible to not watch it and think about them. Like when you sent me the show sheet today, exactly what I said to you is, I was like, there's like this existential angle, but I don't know if it's worthy of like a whole point on the show notes. And I'm not even sure how I'm going to go about it's just like a mush in my head. So there
Yeah.
you go. Now
But
I've spread the mush.
it is something worth discussing, because even if we can boil down our emotions to, as you said, like a 0.1%
Right.
um, of ourselves, and I think it's considerably more than 0.1%, right?
Probably.
Consider when we say, "Oh, well, I wouldn't have done that in that situation," right? Let's keep it topical,
There
right?
we go. Let's go. Here we go.
Will Smith slapped the fuck out of Chris Rock at
He
the
smacked him though.
Oscars,
Yes, he
right?
did.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's very easy to say, "Well, I wouldn't have done that in that moment," right?
Right.
However, you're saying that without the emotion that Will Smith was feeling at that moment.
Right.
So we do not behave like our true selves without the emotions that move us to make those actions. It's a straw man argument. There's no argument there,
Right.
because you are not yourself. You are everything that makes you up. Every
Yeah.
bit of you. If you have some sort of illness, that is part of who you are too. In the same
Yeah.
way where, someone says, "Oh, hi, my name is so and so. What do you do for a living?" That's usually one of the first questions we get,
Right.
right? Why? Because it tells us so much about ourselves. In the same way that your reaction says something about you too, right? And there is no reaction if there's no emotion. And
Yeah.
and so I think that the answer to that question is, are you still yourself? Is quite simple. No, you're not. You are someone else. There's a shadowy reflection of yourself.
There you go.
And and
Yeah.
and I think that's why people fight so hard to stay awake. That's why people fight so hard not to become one of these pod people, right? Everyone's fighting until that change happens. And then it's like, "Oh, but I didn't realize."
Right.
Now all the pain is gone, but the love is gone too.
Yeah.
Right? There is no love without pain. How do we know that we've experienced love if we haven't experienced the opposite, if we haven't experienced pain, loss? That's the sort of thing that this movie really gets to the center of, beyond all um the political commentary that's going on here, which we'll get to. I think you're right in that the existential part of this, right? The humanistic part of this is why this movie continues to be remade over and over and over again, because something that is overtly political is not interesting outside of the context of the time in which it was made.
Right.
right? But that's why Charles Dickens continues to be read. It's not because his work like Great Expectations or A Christmas Carol was overtly political, because it is, but it's because it's also overtly humanistic.
Yeah. And that's and I well, like when I was done with this movie, like that was what I walked away from it with, was I was like, God, man, like that's what, like you said, like, yeah, it doesn't look like it's old, but you walked away with it with this feeling of this movie could have been, if this movie were shot in color, like you could, you could do a shot for shot remake of this movie, and I think it could still be successful. I mean, we've seen plenty of remakes, all with little spins and stuff like that, but it was just that part of it was so big. That's why it worked without special effects. That's why it worked without a lot of backstory, like what the hell are they?
Yeah.
You didn't need all of that, because the innate existential crisis that you're faced with, like once you get past the initial shell of just survival, like and you start to peel back those layers, there's a lot more to it, because there's, you peel, okay, I'm just trying to survive, you peel that layer back, and then you're faced with that idea of, well, it is kind of surviving, right? Like all of me, all my memories, all. So then you peel that back and you're like, yeah, but without the emotion, but without the pain, you just keep peeling this movie. And it was that's what got me about it. Like, that's what I think none of these remakes have managed to successfully touch. And I'm so happy that I know that this one exists now, because
Yeah.
I've seen the others, and now that I kind of get at the root of this, I'm like, yeah, those have been good and done some fun things, but they didn't hit, like that's like a deep raw nerve to get at. Just like I said, that idea of a life without pain, right? But and because then you also run through this idea of, it's like, so if you willingly like go to sleep knowing that's happening, like, is that like suicide, right? It's like it's a whole
I would think it
bizarre-
is.
and I
Yeah.
think so too. And that's what's so bizarre about it, right? It's just it's I loved it. And like I said, it's just been smashed up in there. I've been thinking about it all day, because that was my biggest takeaway from this movie that made it scary and poignant and beautiful. And we watch this guy slowly lose everything while just trying to hang on to that one thing he has left. Like by the end of this movie, all he has left is the fact that he still has emotion, that he still
Yeah.
has a soul,
His humanity.
and yeah, his humanity. That's it. That's the only thing this man has left. And you watch it slowly all getting taken from him, and it's just incredible. It's something that we've talked about horror movies that have done that on different scales for so long, and to see it done so simplistically but so beautifully was incredible to me.
Can't agree more.
So when we're looking at, just kind of as this movie comes together and the story starts taking place, and you've got all these people saying, my uncle's not my uncle, my mom's not my mom, I don't know what's going on, I can't even explain it. So we finally get introduced to a psychiatrist, and what he says is that they're having an epidemic of mass hysteria. So what we get is what has laid the foundation for plenty of scary movies, horror movies, all of that, which is this classic tale of paranoia, rooted deeply in what matters at the time, with it, whether it be family or whatever. So is this idea of a mass hysteria, a paranoia that you're not sure if what's happening is real or not, like, is that still poignant? Does that still scare?
I think it does. When you don't know if you can trust your neighbor, that's scary, right? There's I mean, this isn't a new story. Even in 1956, this wasn't a new story. You've got stories like Fahrenheit 451, stories like Brave New World, 1984, where at the heart of the story is what makes us human, what makes us matter, and what happens when we lose that. And a lot of that sort of fiction comes about at the the dawning of the totalitarian government, be it fascism, communism, any one of the isms, right?
Right.
So that's what really people were afraid of, that we're going to lose ourselves in this ism. And I think that story of, can I trust you? I've known you for so long, and yet now you don't seem to be who you were before, right? You've gotten sucked into this thing. Can I trust you? Right? There's that moment where we finally realize that is it Dr. Kaufman, the
The
psychologist?
psychiatrist. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Psychologist,
psychiatrist. He's not who Dr. Bennell has thought he's been this entire time. It's like, I don't even know you anymore, sort of thing. It's very esoteric, but it is also something that we can definitely think about. We all know at least one person who at some point in our relationship we thought, I don't know you anymore. The
Right.
person that you were, the person that I had this incredible relationship with, that person's gone. And I don't know if that person's ever coming back. And it's possible you're that person. And I think that's the really scary thing too. If you're no longer the person that you were before, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Right.
There's because there's lots of change that's good, and there's lots of change that's bad. And I think that this is what this story really gets to is, can you trust the change that's going on in the person next to you? Or are you the change in the person next to you? In the person next to that guy, and are the one at fault here, right? Are you then trying to pass this change on to someone else? I mean, it all sounds a little heady, and it is.
Yeah.
But I think that this is really that sort of like mob mentality, cult mentality that in the 20th century and definitely in the 21st century has become pervasive, where it's a sort of all or nothing thing. Everyone is all in on things now.
Yes.
You're either all this or you're not. You can't just be a little something.
Right.
Like I don't know, like I'm all in on animation. I love animated shit.
Right.
Disney cartoons, Looney Tunes, I fucking love it all. You throw an anime at me, I'm watching it, right? You're not hearing me say, well, I don't know, I have to look at that. No, fuck that. Yeah, is it illustrated? Yeah, I'm in. That's me. And I'm at fault here too, because anything that even remotely looks like heavy metal, I'm gonna watch.
Right.
And to keep it kind of sci-fi related here, that's kind of a scary thought, that we jump so like we're never playing just a tip. We're always going balls deep. and sometimes you want to wade into the pool. You don't want to just cannonball and completely submerge yourself. But we get so excited. And that's kind of like the human condition, is for us to get excited about new things that do in fact excite us. Like, hey, have you heard about our Lord and Savior Cthulhu? We want to invite people in on this new thing that we've just discovered, and that's the scary aspect of it, is that sometimes we don't realize until it's much too late that we're way in over our heads. And then what do? You can't do anything about it at that point. You're so far deep that the only way to get out of this hole is to keep digging.
Yeah. Well, and like this, to take it back to that idea of being able to trust somebody that you've known for so long. I think that in the when we're talking about does it still scare, like, and you're absolutely right, that's something that's always going to terrify. And unfortunately, over the past, let's just say for the past 6 years, right?
Mhm.
We've been faced with plenty of opportunities where you have suddenly been face to face with somebody and realized that you didn't really know them, right? The truest self shows in times of tragedy. And so we've become, like I said, in the past 6 years, we've had so many opportunities for people to show their truest selves. And even if it's not becoming, a pod person, right? It's just, oh, okay, so that's where your emotions took you. And turns out I don't really know who you are, and probably we're not friends anymore, right? And we're fortunate / unfortunate enough to have social media where everybody's always shouting all of these things all the time, right? And so
They can't control it.
yeah, they can't. It's just there all the time. And so
The best thing is it seems like the dumber they fucking are, the louder they shout.
Yes. And so it's not even about what's interesting is how short the line is between a movie like this, which is, can I trust you because you're not actually the person who I knew, right? Like you're actually somebody different. And then the line of, can I trust you because the person I knew wasn't actually you, right?
Mhm.
Like they're mirror images of each other. Whereas in this movie, you don't know if you can trust your uncle because it's not him. It just seems a lot like him, but it's not him. Whereas, if a man is lynched in the streets and somebody starts running their mouth about whatever whatever they feel about it, and somehow it's the person's fault, right? Then you're like, whoa, so it turns out the person that I've known and that I've been associating with for however many years, that was the one that's not actually you. And so now we're face to face with the fact that we can't trust people because we're meeting who they actually are. And that's a weird, like, two sides of the same coin type thing that we're faced with this movie. And like I said, just a very short line to draw between what this was getting across in the 50s and what we're facing now, because we're always inundated with this 24-hour news cycle and all these things that are always happening. Like we're just everybody, opinions and assholes, right? Everybody's got them, they all stink. But we're constantly face to face with everybody's asshole, like in this situation, and so and like that is a really interesting idea of the idea of, can I trust you, being ever prevalent, but now seeing a mirror image of what this movie produced. So I agree with you 100%. I think that still scares, because whatever the reason may be, you see something like this and realize that tomorrow you could wake up and somebody you've known forever is a different person for one reason or another. And that hits hard, like, especially that kid who it was his mom.
Yeah.
Right. Or the girl that it was her uncle. And she said, he's been a father to me since I was a child, since I was a baby. Like, that's scary. That's never going to not be scary. Like, at the core of everything human is this idea of family and belonging to a tribe. And when suddenly you're on the outside looking in for one reason or another, that's horrifying.
Absolutely. I think it's the most horrifying aspect of the movie. Our good friend, my friend and yours, Frank Kowalski, welcome back, Frank, says, when I watched this movie for the first time, I watched it with my grandfather. He pointed out how the mass hysteria relates to the Red Scare and how in the 50s he thought everyone was a commie. And we are going to get into the Red Scare aspect of this, because it is a major aspect of this movie, regardless of what Don Siegel, the director, or Kevin McCarthy, the actor that plays Miles Bennell, despite what they say, I mean, the DNA is there, and you have to view things in context,
Right.
and the context is certainly there. One of the other things that I want to comment on before we move on from the story is when the town is finally almost completely turned and all we have is Miles and Becky and they're running away and they sound the klaxon alarm, right?
Yeah.
Throughout the town. That is one of the most horrifying sounds I have
Yes.
ever heard in a movie. I do believe that the screech that the pod people it kind of emanate, whatever it is, because it doesn't seem like it comes from like their mouths.
Right.
It's like a guttural thing. It's coming from inside of them. From in the remake is
Donald
quite scary.
Sutherland.
Donald Sutherland's screech at the end
Nightmare
of the
fuel.
movie. I mean, yes. What's more nightmare fuel? The Donald Sutherland screech at the end, or the man dog?
Oh God,
Earlier
the
in the
man
movie.
dog. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, that's horrifying too.
yeah, that's pretty bad.
God, man, that one.
Yeah, that movie is. I mean, it approaches body horror.
Yeah.
It's fucking crazy, that movie. Even so, I think that klaxon alarm in the movie, which we all know is it's a bomb. It's a bomb alarm.
Right.
That's what it was for. It was for nuclear bombs. Go hide in a bunker somewhere. Children, get under your desks because that's gonna save you from the atomic bomb. Right. That was horrifying. And it's very different from the kind of alarms that we've heard in other movies where they do have to sound, the atomic alarm, but it gives me chills every
Yeah.
time I see this movie. The alarm is going off. The entire town is giving chase. That is one of, I think, the most hair-raising. I'm getting goosebumps right now just thinking about it. It is one of, I think, the scariest moments in any movie I've ever seen. It still manages to scare me, and I think that's the sign of a really good horror movie when you can watch the scene over again and it still scares you.
Yeah.
Fuck, that's effective horror.
Oh, dude, no, 100%. Like it was, like I said, it was one of those things where I was prepared to enjoy. I was prepared to enjoy this movie and kind of take it all in. But when it was all said and done, yeah, the fact that I genuinely was terrified so often in this movie was you get into this place, especially guys like us doing this podcast, and I think we've talked about this. Where you get into this place where you feel like it takes a lot to scare you because you've seen so much, but then you realize that it's never really about quantity, right? It's about quality. And this movie has got oodles and oodles of scary quality.
Yeah, and nary a jump scare in sight.
Right.
It's all atmosphere. And it's that feeling that you get down in your stomach of what would I do in that situation?
Right.
That's I think the truly terrifying thing is that it makes you think. And I think any movie that makes you think, depending on your state of mind, because if it's too late at night, just give me fucking Friday the 13th Part 4. Like I just want to watch people die, But if I'm in a good state of mind and I'm here for it, I'm ready for it, make me think about the horror, because if you do, oh man, you'll keep scaring me the rest of the day.
Right.
And I think a lot of what contributes to that is both the setting and the people that inhabit this town, right? So Santa Mira is infamous, I guess we could say, in the realm of science fiction horror, because for those of us not aware, Elliot Taylor and E.T. lived in Santa Mira.
Right.
Now, this is a fictional town, but this movie was so influential that plenty of science fiction stories have drawn their characters into this world. One of my favorite underdog horror movies, The Season of the Witch, right? Halloween 3.
Yeah, I was like, Nick Cage? No, got it. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch.
No, and not George Romero's Season of the Witch either, which is actually about witches. No, the third Halloween movie, the redheaded stepchild of the Halloween franchise,
right?
Dr. Dan Chalice, played by the incomparable Tom Atkins. All of this takes place in Santa Mira. This is where the druids are doing their dark science magic with the silver shamrock masks that are going to kill all these children on Halloween. It's
I
right
remember
there in
that.
Santa
I just
Mira.
don't remember that it was Santa Mira.
Yeah, it
Okay.
is. So like this is the influence that Santa Mira in Invasion of the Body Snatchers has on the science fiction and horror world. The Dark Tower has, which I've never read, but I found this out today, has one book that takes place in Santa Mira.
Oh, well, I read the first one just a week ago. Haven't made
Well,
it towards Santa Mira
I
yet.
think it's like, I don't know, maybe book number 14 or 37 in the series.
Well,
I don't know.
by 8, they're all 5 books thick anyway, so the numbers don't matter.
So these characters, right, that are hunting down Miles and Becky, I mean, they are the ones that really make this city come to life, that really make this story come to life. So, how does Santa Mira work as a setting for you, right? And how convincing are its residents?
So, and I know that part of this is because it just boils down to the fact that it's black and white, right? But I kept getting, and this is, stick with me here, I kept getting Pleasantville vibes, right? Because
Absolutely.
it's not only that it's just in black and white, but it's also that it's this picturesque town and everybody's doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, right? At one point in the beginning, he looks out the window. He's like, yep, there's Dr. So-and-so or taking his secretary out to lunch. And here's this person doing that. It's Truman Show-esque, right? Like
Yeah.
you can, this town is so just satiated in what it is that you can just look out the window and everybody you see, you know where they're going because they do the same thing every day because they're all playing a role. And what's weird about that is this idea that he says this before he realizes that they are pod people and they quite literally are just playing roles. And so, you got this idea of a town where at first it took a really long time for people to realize what was happening because everybody is just living a life where they play their part. And that was Pleasantville, right? Like you stay in your lane and you do what you're supposed to do. And so like I can even see that the influence of this on something like that, even if it's not direct, but this idea of the idyllic 50s town. And
It's very Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah, there we go. It's just, and so it makes such a great setting for this in particular, because like I said, there weren't any major changes in anybody's life once they became a pod person, because they went from metaphorically playing a role to literally playing a role. And
there is that scene when they are holed up in his office, in his practice, where they're looking out through the window and they're seeing everyone move. And we know at this point that they're all pod people. And he mentions, this looks like any other day.
Yeah.
But it isn't until Becky says it's kind of busy for a Saturday that you start to realize, shit, they're on the wrong schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Stuff like that, right? It's it's terrifying. There's an element of that in it that's terrifying to like the young punk kid in me who like was like, I'm never gonna be in my late 30s and just doing the same routine every day, and now it's like, oh, time to get up and take a shower and do the same thing that I do every day, right? And there's so there's that part of it that's like terrifying to like the young nihilist in me. But then, like I said, there's this other part of it that's just so scary that it's like, man, you could live a life that's so mundane and routine that if you became a pod person, no one would even know. And so I think that this setting of this town that like, we keep drawing comparisons to all these other things. It's such a perfect area for this to happen because it gives something so simple, gives another depth to the scariness.
I agree. In fact, I have nothing to disagree with. I think one of the areas in which this movie is better than the remake is the remake takes place in San Francisco. And I mean, it is much more picturesque,
Right.
Iconic landmarks. And it has that added sense of like the stakes are raised because this is now happening in a large city where the fallout of this would be, disastrous. However, anyone who's ever been to a small town or lived in a small town, now I'm from Miami, not a small town, but I've been in many small towns. My parents used to take my siblings and I on vacation every summer, and they had an RV, and we would drive through everywhere in the country. And so we would stop in many different small towns. Everyone knew each other. There was no hiding from your neighbor. You knew the person who owned the corner drugstore, you knew the grocer, you knew the butcher, you knew everyone. Everyone had a job there, and it was really important because without them, I mean, the town starts to fail. It's also part of what makes this so scary in this iteration of the movie, because everyone does know everyone else. And when you do know someone that well and you still quite can't figure out whether they're a pod person, that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
And when you're all looking at each other, because it is part of the human condition to be nosy, right? When I walk down my street, I'm looking at my neighbor's windows. and I don't think I'm a particularly perverted person. Just normal amount of perverted. Right.
Just, socially acceptable levels of.
But if your window's open, I'm looking in. Why?
Oh yeah, I
You're
go for runs.
me.
Yeah, it's like I go for runs and I'm like, oh look at what they're watching.
Yeah. Like for example, I know my neighbor's kid fucking loves Ice Age. Want to know why? Because that window's always open and it's on fucking loop.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, sometimes I want to go in there and watch with them. It's fucking awesome. I love Ice Age.
Yeah, good movie.
So that's one of the things that I think really works about this. The fact that Santa Mira is a small town and not some huge city like San Francisco. I think that's an element of the horror that works for it because you know everyone, right?
Right.
There's not a single fucking person that Miles didn't know by name.
Yeah.
And that's scary.
Right. When you look at San Francisco, it's easy to be like, oh, well, if there were an invasion, and it's the home and the homeless people that are there, it would be easy for them to be different and nobody know because people don't know them on the streets. And so you're right. That idea of everybody knows you and you still got to pass. That's scary.
That scene where Miles and Becky, and I just spoke about the alarm, right? But the scene where Miles and Becky come out of his office and they have to pretend to be pod people is absolutely terrifying.
Yes.
It's so scary. They have to talk to that police officer who he addresses by name, and then they're walking down the street, and it isn't until the dog almost gets run over that she lets out that scream that it's like fuck, now they're gonna be on to us.
Yeah.
That's the people in this town. I mean, they really are scary. And you look at the way that someone like that police chief in the very first scene where we meet him in the basement of Becky's father's house, right? Becky's father himself. I mean, that's fucking creepy, This, I think, is part of what makes the movie work so well, because we have characters that we're also familiar with, who we end up associating with this movie are the people that we know on a personal level, and we start questioning, how well do I know this person? Take your coworkers, just that one little group of people. How well do you actually know your coworkers? We know the person that they show us at work,
right?
But do we know them? What happens behind the closed doors, right? Are they pod people? They're not pod people, but are they?
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, and that it's interesting that this movie, that term, we've used it 100 times, pod people, right? That is in the zeitgeist. Like the idea of pod people is such an ingrained part of the social unconscious now that there are probably people who have used the term pod people, using it correctly, knowing exactly what they meant, that have no idea what Invasion of the Body Snatchers is. And so, I mean, we've kind of been talking about it already, but when you're looking at pod people as movie monsters, like, does that make for, I mean, and I guess we've kind of answered this already, but does that make for a good movie? Like when you go to see this, when you're just looking at a bunch of normal people who are really kind of doing their best to act normal, is that a good movie monster?
I think absolutely it is. I think that this is, in fact, one of the most classic movie monsters that you can find, because they are us. And as opposed to movies like Frankenstein, for example, where we are presented with something that looks like a monster, but when you stop and think about it, in truth, it's people that are the real monsters in the movie. The monster in this movie is presented as us.
Right.
We are those monsters. And I think that this is one of the very first movies to take such a critical eye to us. We are normally the protagonist. We should identify ourselves as the protagonist. And yet I think this movie encourages you to think a little bit outside that box. Are you Dr. Bennell? Or are you Jack Belichick?
Yeah.
Are you Becky? Or are you Terry?
Teddy.
Teddy. Yeah, Teddy. Morticia.
Morticia,
as you pointed out earlier.
Yes, she is Morticia, or would eventually become Morticia.
Morticia Adams, 10 years down the road, after she and Gomez married. Yeah. I think also the fact that we never see this happen on screen, but they do mention it. The fact that your former body disintegrates.
That I loved that so much, because it's like just enough explanation, right? Where it's like it kind of it spawns in your house, you go to sleep, it absorbs everything and then you just kind of disintegrate, and you go, yeah, okay. Like, but it's like, but it was not even like sarcastically. It's like, okay, here for that. Good to go. Thank you. I needed that 3 sentences, and I'm here now. Like, I get it. Let's go. Right.
Yeah. You've given us just enough to go off of.
Right.
So that we understand what's going on here. And I think that one of the things that this movie did really well is it didn't commit to special effects that it couldn't pull off convincingly.
Right.
Because the birthing of the pod people looks quite convincing, I think.
Yes.
And a lot of that has to do with makeup effects, because we get, like, really it's the actors themselves
Right.
with, copious amounts of plaster and gelatin and whatever else it is that they put on them, and they make them look featureless in that position, and the way it's shot, and with the light kind of like drowning out a lot of the lines on their face. It's a really effective way of doing that. But showing someone disintegrate, well, that's a different level of special effect that you have to shoot there, right? I mean, we had seen something kind of like that in the horror of Dracula. I don't know if you ever saw the
Did
first
not see that
of
one.
the Hammer horror Dracula movies.
I don't
Um,
think I've seen that one. I
it's
know
got a
I've seen a handful of or one or two Christopher Lee Dracula films, but I just don't know which ones. Off the top of my head.
this was his first one, and Peter Cushing plays Van Helsing in his own
Possibly.
inimitable way.
Yes.
And there's this great moment where he uses some silver candlesticks as a crucifix, and he kind of stuns Dracula, and then he runs across a table and jumps, and he brings down these shades, and it's daylight out, and the light just hits Dracula, and he starts turning to dust. It doesn't hold up well. It's a great ending,
Right.
but you watch it back today, and it's like, I wish maybe they had done just the like turning to ash part a little differently, but you do what you can with what you got. And in truth, I mean, it is a fantastic ending. But I think the part of the reason why this movie holds up so particularly well is because maybe Don Siegel thought, I can't do this, and said, I'm not going to then.
Right.
I'm not going to try to slap some shit together and end up with a B movie. Because for starters, the budget was slashed. They went from $420 some odd $1,000 budget to like a $350,000 budget. So we're talking about a considerable amount of money that's
Right.
slashed here. If you're already working with a smaller budget than you already thought, I mean, trim the fat. We don't need to see them turn to ash. But just hearing that this is something that happens to you, right? If you weren't convinced before that you die so that this
Right.
new version of you can exist, we're telling you now, you die. This new version of you comes in, right? And this is not the first time you hear this before, right? If you want to become a better version of yourself, you do, in a way, have to kill the person you were before.
Right.
You have to leave all those negativity, those whatever the bad things are behind, and become a different person. And the question is this going to be good for you?
Right.
Or not?
And it's you were talking about like Frankenstein, where you're presented with what is obviously supposed to be the monster, and then we're kind of we're faced with these other things. I think that another one that this kind of plays with in that aspect is the idea of King Kong. When you go back to the original King Kong, and when it's all said and done, it's like, oh shit, we're the bad guys. Like, that's the logical feeling to have at the end of King Kong. It's like, damn, like, that was seriously just a big monkey trying to live his life, and we fucked that up. So, but in this one, there's no sheen to that. It's just like, hey, look at this person and what they're kind of like when they're just cold and rational, and that's what you've got to deal with. And so it makes you again look at the human condition. It's like, whoa, maybe it is more than that 0.1%, right? That's emotion, and that makes me, because I feel like I'm a whole hell of a lot different than what the cold, unemotional version pod person of me would be. And so by making them, again, you get this really introspective thing where when you start to build the pie chart of what makes you, and you start to, that emotion and like sense of humor and all of that stuff start to creep in, and they're just making a bigger and bigger piece because, like you said, what would I do in that situation? God willing, I'd act a lot different than these pod people are, even though they constantly are saying, no, it's you, you're still you. No, obviously you're not. But the constant affirmation that they are the same people really makes you look at the human condition as the terrifying aspect of this movie, which I think makes the pod people an extraordinarily effective movie monster.
And the pod people, what they mean, and this moves into, I think, the final topic we're going to touch upon before we go into ratings. What the pod people stand for is hotly debated. Is this movie an analogy for McCarthyism and the Red Scare? The paranoia that came along with, is my neighbor a communist, right? Or is it about communism itself, where if we are all equal, are we different, right? In the eyes of our government, right? There's such an importance placed on the individual, on the self in America, right? It's part of our rights here, your individual rights. So that and I think that these two things can exist at the same time, if you ask me. But the fear of communism and the fear of McCarthyism. So I guess my question is, what do you think? Are we reading into this? Is this just a movie about an invasion of body snatchers, or is there something more to this?
I think that the use of the phrase like this mass hysteria and this paranoia, and the time when it came out in 56, I think it's impossible to completely turn a blind eye to all of that. And again, the discussion we've had so many times in what a piece of art becomes when the writer puts the pen down for the last time. Yeah. I think that whether or not Don Siegel, who by the way also made Hell is for Heroes with Steve McQueen, so while we're talking great movies that he's made, God, such a fucking great movie. Bob Newhart's in that too, and so good. Anyway, so I think that regardless kind of what he says and what the actors say, I think that there's no way that you can take that away from people, that this is how that you're going to read into it. Like, I don't claim to be an expert on McCarthyism or just the way that the whole Red Scare went down. I actually learned a decent amount about how brutal that idea of the Red Scare was watching that new Lucy and Desi movie on Amazon with
I haven't seen
Javier
it yet.
Bardem.
Yeah.
And like the whole premise of the movie is like really early on, like it's the news article comes out that says Lucy is a communist. And it really, there's a lot of times through all the things that happen in that movie that it delves in really deep to how the Red Scare affected mostly Hollywood, but that's where it was huge. But I do know that it was this whole thing like nationwide, and I think that it's impossible to remove that. You can't just that's not just like this one kind of bristle on the paintbrush that you can cut out. I think that it's interwoven in such a way that if you take that out, you start one, I think it's impossible to take it out. But if you were, then I think that a lot of this movie doesn't really make sense. And even if you're not looking at it through that aspect, even if it's not specifically Red Scare, it's just that's what the movie's about. And it came out during that time. I don't think it's possible to remove that. I think that it's one of those just kind of like we last week on Day of the Dead, we talked about like them being like, no, that's not what it's about. It's not about Reaganomics and no, Night of the Living Dead isn't about racism. Horse shit. I don't care. I don't care if you created it, wrote it, directed it, starred in it, and you own the only copy. No one's ever going to tell me that Night of the Living Dead's not about racism.
Yeah,
right?
I'm going to tell you what it's about.
Exactly.
Mr. Writer, sir.
That's where I stand with this. Like, no one's ever going to convince me that this is not about the Red Scare because it's inescapable. Down to the fact that in that scene when they realize, oh, it's normal, but it's busy for a Saturday, and then it's like, then you just get this thing where everybody just like perfectly like little ants all walk to the town square, and
so
a couple of words are said, and then they all just they all set off doing what they're supposed to do, and it's this hive mind idea of what the American idea of what made communism terrifying at the time was that there was no you were just a cog in the machine. And so I think that it's impossible to remove that and say that that's not what it's about.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that something can be two things at once.
Right.
The idea that this is anti-McCarthyism, but also anti-communism, I think can coexist. Because I that's the problem with extremes. is that, I mean, really they're just the same thing.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's to keep it sci-fi. Right?
Yes.
Although, is Star Wars more sci-fi or fantasy? I've always thought of it more as fantasy.
It's a space opera. I tend to go fantasy too.
Yeah. I mean, there's spaceships, there's laser swords and laser rifles, but
it was a long time ago.
Exactly, it was a long time ago, and they're knights. They're knights. And there's like queens and princesses. I'm going fantasy here because if the Force ain't magic, all right, and if Obi-Wan is like ain't some Gandalf style wizard, I don't know what the fuck he is.
There we go. But yeah, I mean, like I said, you can, it's if everything, because and the reason that I bring that up is because when you're only looking at extremes, we've had this conversation in the group chat before. When you say only a Sith deals in absolutes, Chief, that's an absolute. Right? Like when you approach an extreme view with an extreme view, you have a hard time understanding that something can be two things.
Yeah. And I think that this movie is that, it's a condemnation of McCarthyism. And for those of us who are maybe aware of the term McCarthyism, but not 100% certain on what McCarthyism is, in the 1950s, the Cold War was just getting started. Russia was the new bad guy, as it is today. And we were really afraid that communism was going to get strong footing all over the world, right? The domino effect. You always hear about the domino effect in your American history class, right? It's why we went to Korea. It's why we went to Nam. We were afraid that it was going to come here, that the Russians were sending sleeper cells and that they were going to awaken and take over our local government and then state government and then even on the highest level. And so Senator Joseph McCarthy, fine, upstanding senator that he was, basically decided, hey, y'all are going to out the people that you think are behaving in un-American ways, right? And there was the House Un-American Actions Committee, and HUAC, they called it. And basically everyone was spying on one another. Yeah. And taking notes and very afraid. He created maybe the largest mass hysteria that this country has ever seen. And for me, part of the reason why this movie still works so well today is because very recently we had very similar circumstances where if you were not saying the right thing or wearing the right thing, you were seen as un-American. And that's a really scary thought, that I can be called un-American, that I can be called unpatriotic for not believing the same thing that you believe.
Yeah.
Because isn't that part of what makes America so beautiful, that we can have different beliefs?
Supposed to be, right?
It's supposed to be, exactly. And so I do there. This is a scathing condemnation of McCarthyism here, I think, because McCarthyism wants us all to fall in line and say America is this, and Miles and Becky represent the opposite of that, right? Jack and Teddy represent the opposite of that until they turn, right? But there's also that I think condemnation of communism, where when you are living in a truly communist society, you and the person next to you are exactly the same in good ways and in bad ways, right? Because equality is a great thing. We always hear about equality as this fantastic thing, right? We all want equal rights. But what happens when, to get those equal rights, we have to be exactly the same,
Right?
And that's a problem too. So I do see this as condemnation of both, because they're both extremes, and it works really well today as well, I think. Without getting into the politics of today, I think it works really well today. It's still relevant because I'm still afraid of certain people that tell me I'm not patriotic, or
Right.
I'm not American if I'm not agreeing with them.
So, but before we move on to ratings or anything like that, I have a question for you as somebody
Okay.
who's seen this movie a couple times. There was one really glaringly odd thing that happened in this movie, and it was a conversation with Becky. Do they refer to going to Reno as getting a divorce? Or do they refer to getting a divorce as being in Reno? There was this weird conversation, right, about how she came back and she was in Reno, and then he goes oh yeah, I was there 5 months ago. I really wanted it to work. And then she's like, I guess we're in the same situation. He goes, yeah, except for now, you're receiving and I'm giving. Is being in Reno getting a divorce? What was that conversation?
I don't know. I think that's one of those things where that's a time capsule.
Yeah,
That
right?
those sort of conversations. I always took it to be as they were two ships passing, in the ocean at night.
Right.
Didn't even know that the other one was right there. Their whole life has been this series of missed it by that much. It was you're not alone, Kowalski. I was so confused with the Reno talk too. Was it code? I do think that it was partly code. I do think it was code. I don't know about the divorce thing, because they do play around later when they're in his house, and he says, "Oh, it's something about do you always cook for your husband?" And then she asks something about his wife, right? And he's clearly not married. She's clearly not married.
But
I don't.
when his nurse first mentions her, she says, "Why are you interested?" And he says, "My interest in married women is no more," or something like that. So he seems to reference her as being married before finding out she was in Reno, and now they talk like she's not married. So that's
a good point too.
That's kind of where I was like, okay, so apparently Reno is where divorces happen, apparently.
Yeah.
Thanks,
I think.
Thanks, Cat House.
I think this might be one of those things where it's when when you and I mimic picking up a phone and we do this, right?
but
The
but
young,
our kids do this.
but the younger generation does this, right? I think it's that sort of thing where it's just like, when we say hang up the phone, and like your students, my students, even they're like, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean hang up the phone? No, you used to actually have to hang the phone back up on the holder.
It made a noise. That's how people knew how upset you were.
Yeah, cling. Now don't come at me, you young whippersnapper.
But yeah, like that was like I said, that part of it was like the one weird moment for me. There was one other thing that I wanted to make sure it wasn't worthy of a whole bullet point or anything, but there is something about the way that movies made in this time were scored that's so fucking cool. Like that moment,
Majestic.
majestic is probably the right word. Like that moment when Becky first walks in and we just get like that really cool, like it's almost like a string quartet, just kind of like playing in the background, and it rises up and it fades through the conversation and it's there the whole time. It lends to that dream element too that we talked about at the very beginning, right? Like this is the moment, right? They're finally back together, but there's that it's that feel, it's the where all the music is similar, but it's different. But it's that part of the music in a movie from this time is such like it's that warm blanket feel that I think I've talked about sometimes when it comes to like watching a slasher and getting like the grainy feel, like the grindhouse feel. The music in a movie made in this time period is just it's so warm and fuzzy, and I just love that. And like I said, the first time it really hit me, like during the credits and stuff, it's like, okay, yeah, that's old scary music. But that music when she first walks in, it was like, oh god, I love that. Like that is just like this untouchable thing about movies made in like the 50s and 60s. So just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, it's that, and it's the soft focus and soft lighting that they use for the female romantic lead.
Yes.
It's actually to go back to Morticia Addams. It's the way Morticia Addams was always lit and shot in the Addams Family show and in the live action movies.
Yes.
Angelica Houston was shot that way. You get those close up of her eyes, and it's always soft focus, and the light is very soft lighting. And it's one of those like classic Hollywood things that you're right. It is kind of it's nostalgic.
Yeah.
Very much like the score. You hear these these big sweeping strings and the booming horns. And I think that's one of the things that I love about older movies is so many movie scores today sound the same. You watch a movie trailer and it's always the that sound that's coming in.
Yes.
Every now and then, and they all sound the same. It's all, lots of synthesizers, and I love synthesizers, right? But it's lots of synthesizers, lots of loud noises.
A hit song in like major scale.
Yeah. With the exception of a few guys like Michael Giacchino, and I think I said that right. I probably didn't. And like Hans Zimmer, like the fucking god that he is. Like almost everyone sounds exactly the same, and it works. But the days of having different sounding scores are gone. And so when you watch a movie like this, the score really does hit you, and it's like, oh man, that's fucking great.
Yeah. And like I said, just that one particular moment, like it was just I was so sold on that obviously not their first meeting, but the first time we see between them, it's just like that music hits and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, cool. This is a romantic scene. Like I'm ready for this, So, so like I said, just a couple other things I wanted to also time capsule for this. Gas was 27 cents a gallon in this movie. Hoorah!
The 1950s, civil rights hadn't been passed. Women still largely weren't working, but gas was 27
But
cents.
gas was 27 cents. I like whenever anybody's like, I miss the good old days. I'm like, I'm choosing to believe you're only talking about when gas was 27
Right.
cents and not all of the other things that we just referenced. Like when you talk about like the days when America was great, I'm just going to assume you're just talking about 27 cents a gallon gas. And for right now, that's the truest you I need to know at this moment because we work together and I need to have a healthy level of professional respect for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So it's that time of the show where we have got to rate this movie. So we always like to remind everybody that when we rate a movie, we only rate it against itself. It's not fair to rate a movie from the 50s to something that came out last week. It's not fair to rate a sci-fi atmospheric horror like this against a slasher. So we're only rating it against itself, against Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So we like to come up with a unique rating system for every movie. And this one, there was a very short discussion because classic movie, iconic for what it is. You've got to go with the iconic pick on what to rate it on. And so we're going to go out of a 5 possible seed pods. What do you give Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
I mean, this is a 5 for me, man. And it's not just because it's a classic, because I've seen classics that I thought were highly overrated. Gone with the Wind is one of them, you know. And Gone with the Wind is not that much older than this is. I think this is a really
It
effective
is that much
horror
longer
movie.
than this is.
Oh boy. I mean, we're talking about 3 times as long as this fucking movie. And really, really only the first half of that movie is necessary. Just scratch the last half of that movie.
Yeah, like if you've got the old one that's the 2 VHSs, just
watch the first one.
Just
watch that first one. Man, can you have 2 more unlikable main characters?
It's you're hard pressed to find 2 least likable main characters than what we were given in Gone with the Wind. But
when their daughter dies in that movie and she falls off the horse, she breaks her neck, she fucking dies, right? The only thing I could think of was, God, good for her. She doesn't have to deal with her fucking parents anymore. They're just fucking awful. Jeez. Anyway, I mean, there are classics that I think are overrated. There are classics that are not worthy of the title classic. And I think this is classic in every sense. The story works, the characters work, the horror works. It's still scary today when a movie that is 66 years old can be played on your television screen and it scares you and it scares your son. I saw this one with my son. I looked at him. I was like, hey, you can actually watch the movie that we're doing on Shiver this week. You want to watch it with me? He said, yeah, man. So we sat down and we watched this together, and he saw it was in black and white. He was like, is there a color version of this? I said, yeah, but you're not watching that yet.
Yeah, no. That one you can't watch.
But yeah, it's fucking terrifying. And I think ultimately that's what a scary movie needs to do. It needs to scare you. And this scares you, and it scares you well, and it will continue to scare you time and time again. It's a fucking 5 seed pods for me, man.
Yeah. Dude, nail head, right? Like you're absolutely right. This is a 5 for me. And I'm also, I'm not a person who's just going to give it a 5 because it's a classic, but God, it was so good. It was so deep. It made me think as much as it scared me, which is nice. Sometimes, we always talk about how it's nice sometimes to watch a Texas Chainsaw and turn your brain off.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's you do that enough, then it's not. And talking about doing that enough, I watched 10 Friday the 13th movies a week ago. Okay. It was nice to have one where I was like, oh shit, there's a lot going on here. Like there are layers, there is atmosphere, there's a smoking hot lead. Like, just all things considered. I mean, she is absolutely gorgeous. Dana Winter, just
stunning.
Just that perfect classic 50s, 60s beauty. I mean, everybody played their roles well. Like we talked about, the special effects were pushed to the exact right point, no further than they had to be, and they gave us just enough. It's absolutely a 5 for me. This is another one, man, where I was stunned at how much I liked this. I expected to like it. I was stunned at how much I liked it.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, man, because whenever there's a really good remake that is special effects heavy and highly respected, I think a lot of times people tend to stop there.
Right.
They'll be like, okay, well that was really good. I don't need to see the original. And I think there's so much that's lost there. Because even if the original shit, right, and the remake definitely improved upon the thing, you got to see where the inspiration started. And I think that this is one where this is a rare occasion where the remake lives up to the original. I know I'm in the minority here. I prefer this version to the 1978 version. I love the 78 version. Sometimes I opt to watch that one simply because the cast, like, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. So, to see Spock in that movie, I'm all in, right? Who isn't a Jeff Goldblum fan? I mean, he fucking rocks it there. And Donald Sutherland is just like the fucking man in everything. So, like, I love that movie. But I do think this is the superior movie. And we also have a ranking here from Mr. Frank Kowalski. He says, I would give this movie a 5 out of 5 seed pods. Thank you for using the appropriate rating system here. I usually don't watch black and white movies, but I was hooked right from the start. Don't sleep on black and white movies, Kowalski. There's some good stuff out there.
Look, Kowalski, Dave is becoming my gateway. Honest to God, Dave is becoming my gateway to there's a lot of greatness in black and white films, because I'm with you, man. A lot of times, black and white, meh. But like now, I mean, we're 2 for 2 on the past black and whites being 5 out of 5s, right? So just stick with us, man, because we've got a good formula here, doing a new one at the beginning of the month and a classic at the end. So I doubt this is going to be the last black and white.
No, but pressure's on. I got to make sure the next one, sticks to landing as well. Kowalski adds, this movie did scare me a lot when I first watched this movie at 9 years old. I thought my brother was a pod person for a while too. Interesting. I never got that from Caden, but then again, you know him better than I do. Maybe he is a pod person.
There's also a really good episode of SpongeBob where he watches a movie about robots and becomes convinced that Mr. Krabs is a robot. So, again, the pervasiveness of this, right? It's the same type of thing, but I mean, like, that's how, synonymous this is with just culture in general now. So there you've got it, with a 5 out of 5, even with the viewers ranking in. We're hitting a solid 5 out of 5 seed pods for the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, released in 1956. If you are listening to us right now on your favorite app like Spotify or iHeartRadio, do us 2 favors. One, make sure you head over there and give us a rating. I know on Spotify now you can rate podcasts. Anytime you give us a 4 or 5, it's going to move us up that algorithm. But 2, if all you're doing is listening, how come you're not watching live? I know this week we were on Tuesdays. Life gets in the way sometimes, but we are usually on Wednesdays, 9-8 Central. So make sure you check us out. If you're wondering what movie we're going to be doing next, because we actually don't know what movie we're doing next week yet, make sure you follow us on all of our social medias at ShiverPod. By this weekend, we'll have an idea. We'll release a schedule for the month of April and the movies that we're going to have coming out. I've been trying to get the interaction going. We've been gaining some followers. We've been gaining some ground. We're trying to keep that social media moving. We're trying to do much more with it. So if you see something you like, make sure you interact. It's going to help keep us on everybody's timelines.
Absolutely. And you can find all of this at geekbro.net, where you can find all the other Geek Bro Network podcasts, shows like Mount Geekmore, shows like What's Up Bro, Seasons of TV podcast, Kick Flicks, Crimacopia, A Dose of Ellie, Comedy Fitness, and the Undisputed Heavyweight Champion. Better let me tell you, with my friend and yours, Ish. And we got to see when we get him back on.
I was about to
here.
say we're due for an Ish sighting here.
Yeah,
soon.
we're due for an Ish episode.
We'll have to. Well, once we make the April calendar, Ish, if you're listening, we're coming for you. We just got to figure out what movie. We'll tell you what April's all about here soon.
Yeah.
Also, if you don't forget, if you head to tpublic.com, you do a search for Geek Bro, you can find merch for all of those shows that we just mentioned, including our merch with our great logo that you can find up here in the corner or on Dave's coffee mug there.
I'd like a coffee pot with the Shiver logo on it, though.
Last one, sure.
Yeah.
You can get stickers, T-shirts, pillows. Neri has like pillows of like the shows that he keeps. They do all of that on TeePublic. It's all made to order. If you got some friends, sometimes it's worth it to get in as a group because shipping isn't exactly cheap there. But we do have some great merch. We've got this amazing logo right up here. So make sure you get your Shiver merch over there at TeePublic. You can search for Shiver Podcast or for Geek Bro, and then it'll pull up all of the shows that you can find on our network.
Absolutely. So on behalf of all of us here on Shiver, fright you very